Hi, my name is Shabri, and in this video we would learn on how to make a basic stencil. So let's get started. This is our basic sketch to develop our stencil. Now as you can see, we have two images of the same design, and if you see them clearly, you can see there are two colors within the stencil that we are going to create. There's a black and there's a white. Now the black portion of the stencil is called as a positive layer, and the white portion is called as a negative layer of our stencil. Remember always when you're doing a stencil to always have your scale, your ruler, and a cutter or a blade. So now let's begin our stencil with our first layer. So now, as I said, we would be having two layers of a stencil. There would be one portion for the black and one portion for the white. So let's begin first with our black layer. So when you begin with your stencil, always make sure that you have a board in the background so that you don't damage your table or your surface. And you can always use a scale if there are straight lines on the design. So you could use your help of a scale and go along the line. One thing that I would like you to remember is that this is your design, so you may not go 100% according to the lines on the design. You can always adapt, change your design, and not necessarily that you have to be 100% accurate. So now let's fill in the details by cutting out the edges. So now we have almost done with our character, the first layer of a character. Now if you notice, you have the mask here, which is a very thin line. So you can always adapt, as I was saying, to the design. You can always thicken these lines so that you have enough space to have a cutout for the black line. And when you have too intricate a line, always use a scale. We have our first layer, which is the mask and the basic outline of the character. So always make sure whenever you do the curves, like for the R and also for the S for example, to begin with the straight line on all sides and then go for the curved lines, and as slow as you can because the curves are the most trickiest part. So now as you see, we are done with our first layer. We can now move to our second layer, which are just the whites, which also called as the highlights. So we could use the scale to start off, and as I was saying about not being 100% accurate to your design, you can also get away with a few highlights if you feel there are certain highlights that is difficult to cut out. So for example, I would rather find it easy to cut out these 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, but the areas where these might be difficult, so you always have an option to adapt to your design. So now we are going to cut out the second layer, which is the negative space, that is the white. The more layers you have, the more colors you have, the more stencils you would be making, because it would overlap over one another. So now we would continue with our second layer. The same way, use the tip of your blade or your cutter So what I've done here for the mask is, because the lines at the mask are very thin, I used a pencil and thickened these lines so that I get a thick line to cut. And now I would be using the cutter to cut out the inside portion of the white. Now we have the required highlights, which is the area of the mask, then the area near the collar, the one near the stomach, and the one that defines the hands. So now we have the two layers of our stencil, which is the positive and the negative cutouts, which are the whites. So always remember, when you are doing a stencil, I always repeat it, that you can adapt to the design of your stencil in whatever way you find it easier. Now again, one more important thing that we have to talk about, that I would like you to remember, is the material of the stencil. So it's always important to know the material of the stencil. Now, because we have chosen the paper as stencil, we cannot reuse these stencils, because when you apply paint over the stencil, there's a high chance that the paper loses its quality and loses its thickness, and also there is a high tendency where it tears. So you cannot reuse your stencil. if you have a thicker piece of paper, if you have a kg cardboard, or if you have an MDF board, or you have a 2 mm cardboard, that would be a highly reusable source of a stencil. So now we would move into the last part of our stencil, which is spray paint. Now we would be applying the stencil onto a surface. So I have here a plywood. So you have an even background. So what you could also do is, if you don't have a plywood to access, or you could also use a wall surface. So make sure that your surface is clean. There are no bumps or there are no cracks on the surface of wherever you're applying, be it a wall or a plywood or a cement sheet or anything. So now first we would apply the first layer, which is a positive, and we would apply it somewhere around here. So now we have our stencil, the first layer of a stencil set, and now we use our black spray. So before you use your spray, make sure you shake it well, and you move in one direction. Now if you want the background to be clean, what you could also do is, you could add newspapers around it to make sure that the background is not being affected by your spray. So what you could do is, you could spray. You also need to keep a distance from the surface where you've stuck your stencil to where you're applying the spray. So now you move from left to right or right to left. But also make sure, as I was saying, if you want to make your background clean, you need to keep newspapers around it so that you control the pressure. So now here we go. Also wear your gloves whenever you're using a spray. There's a high chance that you mess your hands. Now after applying the spray, we can allow this to dry, and then once it's dry, like about 5 minutes, you can remove the stencil so that you can apply your second coat. Also, as I said, keep your hands clean by wearing gloves. So now we would be removing the first layer. So you can start off by peeling off your tapes at the sides. Be careful so that there might be a chance that the paint is stuck onto the surface. So be very gentle when you remove the tape. So now what you do is, you apply the second coat exactly over the first layer. So you can clearly see the background of where we kept the first stencil. So now we would be applying the second stencil exactly over this. Make sure that the details of the negative space are exactly where you want it to be, and that's why we suggest you mark the corners. And please wear a glove. And it's always better if you have the surface that you are working on with your spray in a place where you have proper ventilation, because if you are prone to allergies, if you are prone to dust, you might be affected with the spray. So that's why wear a mask and a glove. So now we apply the second layer with white, and as we did the first layer, you at least leave a feet minimum of a gap and go along the same direction. So now we remove the second layer and hopefully it's dried. That's how you make a basic stencil. I'll see you in the next video.